Hey everybody, welcome to Regulatory Joe. I'm Joe Boyle, president of ClearFile, and today I'm thrilled to introduce our newest guest, Jordan Smith, former co-founder of Healthcare Reporting and practice leader at Lumelight. Jordan, happy to have you on the show. Generally speaking, we talk about the ACA through the issuer, payer, and health plan lens, but thrilled to learn more about your broker and employer group background. Tell us a little bit about yourself and about your background.
Yeah, thank you. I'm happy to be here and looking forward to digging into something that I've been working so closely with for over a decade. I helped co-found one of Lumelight's core original sort of companies, and that was an ACA reporting company. And we were co-founded by an employee benefits broker. I learned quite a bit from him and got into benefits compliance from there. And we grew incredibly quickly, and we learned a lot of lessons in the early ACA reporting days. And so now much of it has felt like it's become just sort of second nature, but we're still learning as the landscape changes. But I'm incredibly passionate about the work that we do because it really impacts people's lives on a day-to-day basis. So that helps us sort of translate the work on the compliance side, which can often be very dense, into something that's actually touching people's lives when they go to the doctor or when they're thinking about which plan they're selecting with their family. And that matters. So it's important work, and it's important to get right.
Absolutely. No, you couldn't have said it better. Speaking of employers and groups and their advisors, if you could dive in a little bit deeper about the importance of the ACA as it relates to employer and getting it right the first time. What are some of the nuances that goes into managing the ACA for that type of group?
Offering compliant benefits matters, right? The ACA came in and sort of became a four-letter word to many who were working in employee benefits, and just making sure that you were complying with that. But this added another layer of something that benefit advisors, seasoned HR professionals, benefit professionals in employers just didn't know, right? And that was the component of now something that is fairly common, the mechanics of a benefits plan, have also become this sort of legal question and this payroll problem and filing to the IRS. So you had departments of employers that are now sort of having to cross-populate in what they're doing and the work that needs to get done for the ACA reporting requirements, the employer reporting and carrier or issuer reporting that was created by the ACA as well. So when we're working with our clients, we're looking for who can be the best to help us support themselves, who's going to have the information that we need. And we look for the broker advisor in that so often because they understand the deep mechanics of it. And they're often that translator for our mutual clients.
That's so helpful to know and learn, and understanding that the ACA not being a brand new law, it's been in force for over 10 years at this point, really getting passed into law in 2010 and upheld with the Obamacare wraparound in 2014. So as you mentioned, how employer groups, this has been new to them at the beginning. They've had to staff for the work. They've had to learn the nuanced requirements. They've had to follow the reporting requirements by state, which again, we do know there's the federal regulations that kind of is the top end overarching rule. And then each state has their own specific nuances in between. So it's a lot to track. So over the past 10 years, this now being an aging, I guess you could say, body of work, how are health plans, or what are some of the pain points that employer groups and their advisors are still struggling with over the past 10 years? Like, how can we get it right? And what is your team doing to help your clients get there?
Yeah. You'll hear me say this a lot through the conversation, and that is getting it right is so important because enforcement here is largely automated, and an employer that is otherwise compliant could really be at risk of finding themselves in a difficult regulatory situation because of inaccurate reporting. Enforcement has actually been ramping up fairly significantly, even as recently as this year. So there are certainly some common misconceptions out there about when we hear that our government is shrinking and that they are laying people off. There is this perception that, well, if the IRS is getting smaller, then who's going to be the one that's going to send out the letter to me about my measly ACA plan? But because the IRS built in some controls early on in the process to make this an automated enforcement, these things just roll, right? It doesn't require a lot of human intervention. This feels like something that should just work, right? And so there's this expectation from employers that my broker's handling this, my carrier is handling this if they're fully insured, or my TPA is handling this, or my payroll provider is handling this. So there's often a feeling of we're just looking at someone else and just a genuine ignorance of who's responsible for doing this, because it doesn't feel like me, the HR and benefits manager at ABC company, should be the one that knows how to do this. So we find that employers are just relying on payroll systems or their benefit system and don't realize that it's not just a payroll problem and it's not just a benefits problem. It's more of a benefits problem, but we find that these systems are often blind to each other, that a payroll system may know how much an employee is paying for the plan that they enrolled in, but if the employee waived coverage, they don't necessarily know about the offer of coverage. Or even if they did enroll, they don't know about what the lowest cost employee-only option that was considered compliant under the ACA was. And so their form reflects a much higher premium amount because they elected the family coverage in some way of the top tier plan. Or if they're looking and relying on their Ben admin system, they may only see the employees that were made an offer and accepted and enrolled through that process. They may miss the part-time employees that were never loaded into the Ben admin system because they weren't relevant to that side of the equation. So one thing that we do is that we look at the output, we look at the input, we look as experts along the process in a way that doesn't require a particularly heavy lift from an employer, but by having some intervention at various points, asking the right questions along the way really helps for accuracy on the back end and saving some headaches. So we've really found a good way to make it happen efficiently, effectively, accurately, without costing an arm and a leg, without requiring a tremendous amount of input from our clients. And that just makes it flow a bit easier in the way they expect. But oftentimes it does require some education of employers in this space that, hey, you can't just rely on your payroll system. You can't just rely on your Ben admin system. It's really more than even the best brokers are able to do with that level of detail, because it does require some art, some nuance to what we're looking for and what we can expect from particular systems. In fact, we're working now with a number of payroll and Ben admin systems to help them get it right for their clients, right? Because it should be reasonable to expect the vendors that are delivering great services in other ways that are great for payroll, great for Ben admin, they should be able to provide this service, but it does require a level of expertise that not even the best payroll vendor, TPA, can do on a consistent basis, because there's this weird meshing of a lot of different sources of data, and there's often one is blind to the other and just don't realize it.
You've really hit the sweet spot here and found that, making something so complex, so simple can be so valuable for your client partners. And we talk about this all the time in our day-to-day, especially from a filing perspective, about education and what we would consider to be healthcare literacy. So if the employer groups can't understand the work that we're doing, how can the member themselves understand the package or the actual healthcare, benefits that they're getting? And by alleviating that and by bringing what we would also call legacy knowledge to the table, a lot of folks who started working the ACA 10 years ago have dispersed with all the volatile changes. So, that brings a lot of comfort, I'm sure, to a lot of your folks in your industry. And on the heels of that, even looking into from a timeline perspective, so, about where things go awry in the process. So I think about, what we do. We really start the brunt of our work at the beginning of each year in Q1 by packaging up our major medical filings. We file them with the state, and then they're approved, right? So right now we're getting ready for 11/1 enrollment. So when you talk about ACA reporting from like a 1099 HC or other tax form perspective, it almost feels like from where I sit, you're starting your busy season right now as we speak. I think just getting ready for these actual forms to go out the door as we're concluding our filings and getting them approved by CMS. So as you start your cycle into next year, what does the timeline look like for delivery of your services? Is it an annual process? And where along that process do the most bumps come into play? Is it a particular month of the year, a particular quarter, or just things folks who maybe don't have somebody such as yourself and your team helping them to look out for planning?
That's a great question, and there's a lot of good stuff there. I will say that one of the areas where it often goes wrong quickly actually even precedes the ACA reporting, the generation of the 1095 and distributions of those 1095 forms, the creation of the 1094 and filing it. That is an annual kind of process that feels much like the normal tax process, right? It's heaviest during January because the year has closed out, the information, and it follows sort of a tax season. But there is a really strong misconception by many in the industry that it is just that first part of the year, Q1 kind of problem that you're prepping for at the end of Q4 of the previous year. But where we see the most issues often are around variable hour tracking. So employers that have high hourly populations where there's inconsistency in their status, that is where things can often go wrong fast, and it tends to happen before. So we do have an entire sort of service that is variable hour tracking. I will say it's smaller, obviously, than our core reporting solution, but it's essential for the employers that need it, right? Because we're helping them determine this employee is full-time benefits eligible in the eyes of the ACA. And so we're able to help them know we need to make this offer of coverage. A lot of our clients don't have that. They don't need that service because they're getting that well enough from their payroll system, right? But the ones that aren't supported in that way or are growing and haven't grown yet into that system, they may need support with variable hour tracking. So that's an ongoing service. We're doing that year round because we're getting regular payroll information, hours worked, to be able to help an employer track and look back on their employees and determine, hey, this person crossed over the threshold, they're full-time benefits eligible, and you need to make an offer to them. I think things also tend to go wrong when employers just don't realize they are subject to ACA reporting requirements, didn't report in the past. So we start this process early with our returning clients, obviously, to get them squared away and ready. They're usually quick wins. But our newer clients that have trickled in from the end of the last reporting season, because they are realizing, oh, we switched our BOR and our new broker started asking good questions about, hey, can you give me some receipts on your ACA reporting filings? Or they may have changed vendors and realized that, hey, we've lost access to this service that was previously being provided by someone else. So we start early so that we can get that information, that backstory, because it's not always as simple as just pull it from your payroll system or just pull it from your Ben admin, Ben enrollment system, however you're accomplishing those tasks. So where there's a high variable hour population is where we tend to see things go wrong when there has been a meaningful, fairly significant amount of change in the organization. They may have grown quickly and not realized that they were subject to the applicable large employer requirements there that now makes this more of a conversation for them. They may have changed from being fully insured to being self-insured. And now, even if they're not an ALE, they don't have more than 50 full-time or full-time equivalent employees, but because they're self-insured, they're bearing that responsibility for producing 1095B forms there. We're looking at that early to try and track down who are the players, what do we need to look at so that when we're working during the busiest time of the year, when it is go time, we've got a lot of that in place.
Jordan, I think the work you do is quite remarkable and impressive, especially with all the moving parts and especially with the level of detail that an employer really needs to understand their employees and their staff and making that easier for them. And you mentioned about, employer groups don't know what they don't know, and sometimes they grow. We use the term grow groups and tracking that. Generally speaking, the ACA defines what small group as 1 to 50 in most states, but states like Colorado and New York really jacked it up to 1 to 100, right? So they increase that threshold, understanding that state nuance law or the state statute that actually is an extension of the federal rules from the IRS or others. And on the heels of that, what we know is with state regulation and federal regulation, there are always penalties, unfortunately, if you don't hit the mark right. So I know your team has been very successful with mitigating risks for your clients and for your members. Tell us a little bit about how the penalties and fines work, because from where we sit, we've actually been able to mitigate a lot from a payer perspective, but would love to hear more about groups and their advisors.
Yeah, that's a really good question, because the penalties operate in a few different ways. And I'll give the disclaimer, I'm not an attorney, so this is from a more of a consultant, sort of subject matter expert perspective, but I've worked with dozens of employers when it's come to penalties. And understanding how the penalties operate, first you have to step back and look at the types of penalties that we're talking about. So there's the penalties around failing to comply with some of those core requirements of the ACA, right? Not offering compliant benefits to your employees through the ACA. Then there are the penalties that can be associated with failing to comply with the reporting on those offer of benefits and enrollments components. Typically, the penalty process starts with a letter from the IRS, a 5699 letter that lets them know that, hey, we have not seen your filing, and we think we probably should have, because we believe very strongly that you are a full-time, you're an applicable large employer with enough full-time employees. And so that 5699 letter is them saying something about you flagged in our system. And that's automated, right? Because they know exactly how many W-2s were reported. They have access to 5500 information. And so they see large W-2 counts from an employer, but no corresponding 1095-C form reporting or 1094-C form. And they can identify very quickly and automate that from those other systems of record that they're referencing. And so that letter comes out and indicates, hey, we think you should have filed. If you don't engage with that, or if you were supposed to and didn't, and can't give a sufficient explanation, can't get things back on track, you're potentially subject to penalties for failure to provide the necessary regulatory forms and reporting to the government and to your members, your employees. And then we've got the penalties for failure to offer compliant benefits. That typically comes through the 226J letter. That's where there's been a lot of hot topic recently. We sort of talked about this seems old hat. Why are we still talking about it? We're still talking about it because it is a dynamic landscape. When we talk about benefits compliance, it's not usually very saucy. There's not a lot of action these days, particularly around the ACA. 2016 to 2019, it was more of a hot topic for ACA, but it's resurfaced around the enforcement of failure to comply with the proper offer of compliant coverage. And so an employer can be on the hook for failing to offer minimum essential coverage that provides minimum value. That's associated with the A penalty that we sometimes call the atomic penalty, the one that if you don't meet that minimum threshold of MECA minimum value, you can be on the hook for every employee that was full-time benefits eligible that you did not make that compliant offer to. If you are offering MECA minimum value, you can still be on the hook for it not being affordable. So affordability matters, and that's more associated with the B penalty. So those are employees that went to the exchange, received a subsidy, and now the government is looking for some help on that subsidy, right? This is the employer shared responsibility payments that we're talking about. And so there is a shared responsibility on the part of the employer. It's another reason why we feel very confident that in any of the recent administrations, this still stays on the table and flies underneath the radar, because this is in some ways a cash cow, right? Because they want to share the burden of healthcare with employers, private health plans, the ones that they feel like there's just this general expectation amongst the workforce that you get healthcare from your employer if they're a large enough employer. And so we see this still continue to come up as an issue for that reason. So the penalties we tend to have a lot of success with because we know what we're looking for. We can articulate it well. We don't typically see a lot of penalties from our clients that used us for reporting because we're intervening along the way. But it is possible. It is possible that someone is only offering MEC and they have those MEC only plans. It's common in the staffing industry where there's high turnover and they want to avoid that atomic penalty, but they know that, hey, we may have a shared responsibility here. That's where accuracy really matters, because if you know you're going to be on the hook for something and you accept that as just part of your cost benefit analysis, then at the very least, you only want to pay on the folks that you really deserve to pay for. And so that's where accuracy is so important and is often hard because it's commonly those staffing agencies or employers that have high turnover and don't want to be on the hook for a full, traditional, robust, affordable, minimum value, full suite of medical benefit. Those two go hand in hand, and that's where we see a lot of need for accuracy. We also have an entire division of our team that works closely with benefits attorneys, that there is oversight in that. That's our Lumelight One solution. And Lumelight One is that most intensive work on our part and truly hands-off experience on the employer's part, where they're getting really in-depth quality control that's from individuals with legal expertise. So they're overseeing that process. And it's designed with some of those things in mind. So employers that can say, we can certify our affordability. We have a great broker who has given us this insight. We don't need your help determining whether or not our affordability safe harbor was accurate. We can certify that ourselves. We've got an option for those folks. But when the stakes are really high, when it matters, if it's an employer that's just typically under a lot more scrutiny, might end up on the news if something goes wrong. They like our Lumelight One solution because we're actually able to give them some of those certifications and attest to things on their behalf. And we also are bringing to them a $5 million guarantee that you're not going to be on the hook if your reporting was wrong, if you used us for Lumelight One to do your reporting. So we're bringing some peace of mind there. So the penalties are automated. They're just kind of flowing through. Often the employers that are most at risk are also the ones that may have the hardest time reporting and need that additional insight there. So fortunately, we have those levels so that we can bring the right level of compliance expertise and share some of that responsibility with our client at various different price points too.
So giving that comfort and peace of mind to your members, I mean, is priceless. With the complex requirements and keeping up with all these changes, have you seen oftentimes where, penalties are penalties are penalties, and quite often it sounds like can be very severe? This is just a reminder to all of our listeners out there. From an org design perspective, compliance should be a core part of your business strategy. It should not be something that is outside, that is looked at as administrative, but a core part of strategic outlook. But what are you seeing in terms of enforcement?
This is from my experience, and so there certainly might be exceptions to this, but we try to keep our ears pretty close to the ground. I am not aware of an employer who made a good faith effort, tried to do the right thing, when it was brought to their attention that they made a mistake, tried to correct it, and was able to do so accurately, be on the hook for the failure to file accurate and timely reports. We work with a number of employers that come to us with that 5699 letter and say, we didn't even know that this was a thing. What do we do now? In my experience, if they take their head out of the sand, they dig in, they do the reporting, I have not seen a penalty assessed there. I have seen penalties assessed for employers that knowingly disregarded that clearly made a half attempt when it was brought to their attention, did not engage an expert and really try to produce accurate forms, but just sort of stuck some handwritten codes on some forms and mailed them in with their response letter. So I have seen penalties applied there, and they have been pretty intense, but not when an employer engages and tries to do the right thing. The good faith effort sort of safe harbor has gone away. So you can't just sort of rely on blissful, well-intentioned ignorance to be a stopgap anymore. So there is a risk there. But in my experience, they're still responding favorably when an employer says, we have a legitimate reason for not realizing that this was applicable to us. We are working to get the corrected files, and then we work with them to do that. I have seen a lot more penalties assessed for that ESRP component, the shared responsibility component, where you were only offering a MEC plan, it wasn't affordable, something along those lines, where there was an issue with the offer that you made. And the biggest risk there is again, if you're not even offering a MEC plan, and you should have been. And the biggest risk for those are the employers that grew very quickly, did not realize that they were an applicable large employer, did not have their benefits plan in place, and they have a period of time where they didn't have an offer of MEC. Those can be fairly significant. Fortunately, those employers are generally still small enough that it's not catastrophic. Where we see the really large penalties initially are instances where the reporting was just wrong in some way. And so they just weren't doing the right thing in their reporting, and we can fix that, right? We've been able to very successfully come in. We worked with a Fortune 500 company that came to us with less than 10 days to get the reporting done, and we were able to turn it around in that amount of time. We worked with another Fortune 500 company that came to us with a humongous penalty, a $32 million penalty letter that you can imagine, even for a Fortune 500 company, is not a good day for somebody. The penalty was wrong, right? It was just sort of a set it and forget it on their ACA reporting. And they thought it was taken care of and flowing, and it was in fact not. And so we were able to get that one turned around very quickly, very accurately, and reduce that penalty completely. They were offering rich benefits. So it's unfortunate that some people had some really bad days over something that was essentially a clerical error, but it is a clerical error that didn't have to exist. But because we were able to get that fee reduced completely, they were able to get back on track with more accurate reporting moving forward. And the price point for that, I mean, you look at a $32 million penalty, even our richest service offering is not pennies compared to that. It certainly was worth the value for them, but we can do it at scale too. And so that's important, because you would think that some of the largest companies in our country have this nailed down with really robust payroll providers, fully staffed benefits and compliance teams. This is just, it's really niche. There's artistry to it. And you've got to really dig in and understand where things can go wrong and know when that changes.
That's fantastic. And you've definitely probably saved a few hands out there. From an advisor standpoint, what should advisors be looking out for, or what jumps off the page for an advisor during the process?
Yeah, that's a good question. Obviously, the biggest red flag that any broker, advisor, consultant should be looking for is, first and foremost, government scrutiny. The IRS or even the Department of Labor, if there are union groups that are getting sort of tense relationships at any given point, you may want to pay close attention to that, because this is something that can be brought to the attention of regulators and that cause a problem. You also don't want a client to miss when they get one of these letters, right? Because that's when we do see some penalties really ramp up, is they ignored the first few letters, didn't know what it was, filed it away, just missed it. Because sometimes the employers that might miss the letter are also the ones that maybe don't have the robust payroll system, maybe have less accurate files or something along those lines. So when you're getting a new client, just sort of assessing, what is their overall hygiene? Are they well prepared for this? Do I need to ask some more questions? Hey, have you gotten anything from the IRS recently? But aside from the obvious there, it really is, if an employer can't produce proof of their ACA reporting when they were with a previous BOR, if they changed carriers, if they changed funding sources, if they changed vendors, or if they changed plans mid-year, that's usually less of a day-to-day kind of thing that a broker may see. But if they sort of broke a contract mid-year and really had to shift benefits, that's where we can see some things go wrong again fairly quickly. So high change is certainly notable. If their payroll system and ben admin system are not fully integrated, that is a potential area for something to go wrong. So if you're bringing a standalone ben admin system that you use for enrollment, you like it, it's included, they like the price of it, but they have a different payroll system, the fact that those two things are not talking is usually a good indicator that the ACA reporting is not going to be accurate from either one of them. Even the best payroll provider, we have just seen be more of a problem there. The last sort of area that we see is really zeroing in on employees that change status. So anytime they had someone go from full-time to part-time, if that's frequent in their business, they need to pay attention to that as well, because it is sort of a known weakness in these systems to be able to account for full-time, part-time status in reverse. Oftentimes they're just looking at, hey, it's accurate now, so-and-so is showing up as full-time, we're good. They're showing up as part-time, we're good. They're not thinking about the fact that that change mid-year has to be accounted for in ACA reporting, which happens on a month-to-month basis. The form reflects all 12 months of the year at individual stages. So we need to know when someone changed status, and that is often a weakness in the systems that we see.
It's a great call out too. And for all the advisors, I mean, I hope they're taking notes out there. And the message received, what are some of the other things that you're doing to strengthen your partnerships with brokers in the marketplace?
Yeah, that's an important question, because brokers play such an important role. I mentioned earlier, we were co-founded by an employee benefits broker that wanted to go into the business of building tools he wished he'd had when he was serving his clients. And so first and foremost, we look for the broker in every relationship with our clients, even if we have a relationship with that broker or not. We know that a surprised broker is often a former broker, and so we don't want the surprise to come through our clients or our mutual clients. Lumelight has just recently rolled out our broker portal. This is a tremendous resource for brokers, giving them both visibility, but also accurate, timely resources that they can use to enrich their business and to help kind of make that connection between the broker experience and the regulatory compliance experience, and supplement their knowledge and give them visibility into what matters for their clients. And so that's just kind of one of many steps that we are taking to enrich the toolkit for our broker partners, our advisor partners, so that they can be well equipped to serve the employers, the plan sponsors, the boots on the ground out there.
You've definitely had a number of core messages for our listeners today in terms of being a proactive employer group, being a proactive advisor, and having a good handle on your business and the people that you serve and your stakeholders within your departments, understanding when all those components and shifts are changing, and then also understanding the rules and regulations surrounding the required documents that you're actually working with. So, I mean, that being said, I've learned a lot in this session today, Jordan. Now tell me, if you had to pick one or two core messages for the groups, what's one or two things that you want them to leave this conversation with?
Yeah. It still doesn't have to be hard. Just because you're not paying for the deepest white glove experience, you can still get accuracy at a reasonable price that doesn't require you to have to sleep under your desk the first quarter of the year to get it done. It does still matter, despite what you may hear in the news. What we're talking about is not often in the news. And so when there is large public perception around the Affordable Care Act, it's so rare that it's actually impacting the employer responsibilities that we're talking about in reporting. So pay attention when you hear ACA in the news, and don't just assume, oh, it doesn't matter anymore, because it does matter. Those penalties are automated, and so it doesn't quite fall to the ebb and flow of regulatory priority because it has become fairly set it and forget it on their side. And then the last thing I think is important to remember is this matters, right? It matters to folks that depend on those subsidies. It's a cost benefit decision for employers, and that's understandable. Are we going to offer robust, affordable benefits or not? And that's a decision, and it's a fair decision. But the fact that those subsidies exist has a real impact on people. And so you don't want to be on the hook for more than you should be. We also don't want the system to sort of fall apart either. And so it's important that these things are done correctly, but that doesn't mean that it has to be a headache.
Wow. Well, thank you for making this all more palatable for the people doing this work. It should be welcomed, not something to turn and run away from, but something that should be desirable, not just to serve the members, but even, let's just say, a career path for folks starting out in the compliance arena and reporting. You know, like over here, we try to make the complex work we do more fun every single day. I've had a lot of fun with this conversation today, Jordan. Just for everybody out there, where can we find you?
Yeah, I'm on LinkedIn, Jordan O. Smith, associated with Lumelight. You can also reach us at lumelight.com. And I've really enjoyed the opportunity to talk with you today, Joe, and be helpful in any way that we can.
Fantastic. Pleasure having you on the show. Thank you for your time. Thanks everybody for tuning in. Give us a like, give us a share, and we'll see you all next time.